This is for identification only, not broadcast. Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy begins in 5 seconds from Woof. Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, a commentary on Oliver Hardy and Stanley Laurel, two funny men of the films, with observations by Professor John C. McCabe.
As Henry Morgan once said about them, with you and me, A and B usually equals C, but with Laurel and Hardy, A and B usually equals D.
Jules Munchin.
They present the art of comedy in its finest and truest light, and it's really something to see, the fantastic creations, the moments, the little gem-like things they do, and also their ability to sustain their characters completely, fully, and thoroughly. They're great, great artists.
Gene Sheldon.
Each member of that audience can put himself into a like situation, something that very possibly might have happened to him sometime during his life, and when he sees it happen to someone else, it suddenly becomes funny.
Hans Conried.
And the wonder to me now that we see them, they were titans. There's no one nowadays who could do, and the stuff is not dated at all.
Orson Bean.
One thing that I always found terribly moving about Stan and Ollie was that even though they couldn't get along, they constantly battled with each other, Oliver Hardy would constantly say, "Never mind, I'll do it. You might get us in trouble." And then, of course, he himself would get them in trouble. And then he would turn to Stanley and say, "Well, this is another fine mess you've gotten me into." He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Ollie." He said, "Never mind." Even though they couldn't bear each other, they were always together. And it was kind of like life, kind of like marriage and relationships of all kinds. People can't get along, and yet they need each other. And to go to the next Laurel and Hardy picture and find, to my happiness, that they were still together was always a source of reassurance to me throughout the years, both in my childhood and after I've grown up.
Again, Jules Munchin.
The fact that these men both are blessed with a comic gift, something that is God-given. It's not anything you can develop. They have a manner of expression, a manner of physical movement, a manner of comic interpretation. And secondly, they are very skilled technicians. They're very great artists. Their manner of relating to one another, the manner of playing the truth, the method, the technique is fantastic. That's why they're funny.
Jack Benny, Marcel Marceau, and Arthur Treacher.
Well, because I think that they have been, excluding Charlie Chaplin, the most popular universal comedians. They were not just nationally well-known or liked. They were liked not only in Great Britain and Australia, where they understand England, but even in countries that couldn't speak or understand our language, they were popular.
Par exemple, Stan Laurel a le masque naïf, pathétique, humain, enfantin du clown. Son masque obéit à des lois mécaniques du théâtre, l'absurdité dans les moments tragiques.
I think they were splendid, don't you? But I think they were just delicious.
And finally, Arthur Stanley Jefferson talking with reporter Bill Rabe.
At what point does the
Now,
audience...
don't ask me what makes anything funny, because that's an impossible...
Oh, at what point do the people start laughing, though?
It's hard to tell. Some don't laugh. Just depends how it appeals to people. I've gone into theaters and been a sensation, and gone around the corner the next 3 days, and you wouldn't know I was on the stage. The same audiences, same neighborhood, same class of people. The same theater, it's a stage, it's the same act I did around the corner 3 or 4 days before. And they laid in the aisles, come around the corner of this other house. It's the same neighborhood entirely. And just a big flop.
And your guide on this exploration of Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, Paul Winter.
Thank you, Henry Schneidwind. We'll be hearing more from Jules Munchin, Gene Sheldon, Hans Conried, Orson Bean, Marcel Marceau, Arthur Treacher, Arthur Stanley Jefferson, who is, of course, best known as Stanley Laurel, and biographer John C. McCabe. John McCabe, a graduate of the University of Detroit, Fordham University, and the Shakespeare Institute at Stratford-upon-Avon, England. One must specify England. There are so many Stratfords this year. Dr. McCabe is currently the chairman and professor of the Dramatic Art Faculty of New York University. He has written a biography, which is subtitled, A Funny Book About Stan, the Skinny One, and Ollie, the Fat One, Two Funny and Gentle Men. The book is entitled Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, and that is the title of this documentary radio program. We will be hearing a great deal more from most of the people who commented briefly at the opening of this program, including those people who were laughing. They were theater audiences in Denmark and Belgium, and they were watching Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy perform on the stage. Recordings of portions of these performances will be broadcast here for the first time as will part of a BBC program. These recordings are from the personal collection of Mr. Laurel. We asked Laurel and Hardy's biographer, Professor John McCabe, 2 questions, which are the principal concern of this documentary radio program.
Why were Laurel and Hardy so popular so long? And why did they play to so many people? Well, first of all, as Steve Allen told me once, they were popular because they were funny-looking, the fat and the skinny and the derby and so on. But something much more than that, of course, goes into it. They had, first of all, the universal appeal that great clowns always have for us. They looked funny, and they were funny because they did simple, ordinary things in such a endearingly stupid way. They also had a pantomime base, like Chaplin. That is, everything they did without paying much attention to speech. They, in a sense, in the old-fashioned sense, they acted things out. When they are moving a piano up a long terrace of steps, they do so with their bodies. They don't have to use their voices much, and the additional comedy that comes from their voices is, I think, points out their particular endearing qualities. Stan is the skinny little fellow who's really always frightened to death, terribly, terribly stupid, and Ollie is the fat, bumptious fellow that we see all the time, who is more stupid than Stan, but doesn't realize that he is, and thinks that he's much smarter. Well, these 2 men epitomize, really, when you come down to it, all of life. They epitomize all of humanity. They represent the 2 kinds of people in the world. The little fellow who's always frightened, and the big fellow who is never frightened, but really is underneath, because aren't we all, in a sense, frightened of life? Well, with Laurel and Hardy, it's a gigantic battle, life, just as life is a gigantic battle for us all, I'm sure. They want to know, will someone tell them how? Will someone lead them up the path and into a new and golden tomorrow? That's what they ask themselves and their neighbors. And the fact that they're always meeting with disappointments doesn't affect them at all. And I hope this doesn't sound pretentious, but I always think that Laurel and Hardy personify the kind of thing that William Faulkner said when he was given the Nobel Prize. And in his speech of acceptance, he made the very assertive statement that he believed that mankind will not only endure, he will prevail. Well, Laurel and Hardy will endure, and they will prevail because they are all of us. They are every man. They are everybody in the world trying valiantly to get ahead, and yet getting knocked in the shins and getting rasped voices, getting all the troubles that one can conceive in the world come down upon them. And they're tremendous and massive and valiant attempts to get out of this that makes them so hilarious, because they somehow or other always do. They do get out of their troubles, but the way they get out of them is always the most unconventional way possible. As Henry Morgan once said about them, with you and me, A and B usually equals C, but with Laurel and Hardy, A and B usually equals D. And we have never thought of it equaling D, but by George, we look at it again, and it might very well equal D. And that our way, that is the world's way, is not the only way. And wouldn't it really be much nicer if we could do it the Laurel and Hardy way? Wouldn't it be much nicer if we could, say, do something extraordinarily grand, like signing our name on a hotel register with the swashbuckling panache with which Ollie Hardy signs his name? That's one of the great things in life, one of the things that we look forward to doing, but we never do. That's why they are so great.
This theater audience in Belgium, too, thinks that Laurel and Hardy are just great. Their opinions are expressed without restraint. The year, 1948.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You're very, very kind, and I do wish there was some more we could do to entertain you.
Why don't you sing a song for the ladies and gentlemen?
Well, that's a good idea, Stanley. I'm glad you thought of that.
Glad you enjoyed it, first time.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to sing a song that we used, a chorus of a song that we used in one of our pictures. Please, sir?
Harvest moon up in the sky. I had no loving since January, February, June, or July. No time, ain't no time to stay outdoors and school.
Stan Laurel comes back with his partner and announces that Gok, the name by which he is known in that country, will dance.
May I say a few words now?
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you a little surprise. Gok will dance.
Shine on, harvest, up in the sky.
Producer Bill Rabe took his tape recorder and the super chief to Los Angeles and a car across the freeways to an apartment in Santa Monica overlooking the sea. In a room filled with the byproducts of a full life on stage and screen, he asked Stan Laurel how it all began.
I was raised in the business, you might say. My dad had several theaters. He authored several plays. My mother was a well-known actress in that part of England. It was mostly in the north of England. They had these theaters. Shows, of course, played. I think the first time I was on the stage, I played a newsboy in a show called, let me see, I think it was called I believe it was The Lights of London.
Do you remember your first line?
It was just to walk across latest edition, so I don't even remember. But I mean, it was so very slight that it was just an exposure to an audience for the first time. I think the reason I drifted into comedy was the fact that I wasn't just cut out for an actor. I mean, a straight actor. I just wasn't able to talk. I mean, as I keep saying. My first professional job was in a pantomime. In the north of England, it was a juvenile pantomime. Pantomime, of course, isn't the miming as you refer to it here.
Christmas show.
It's a Christmas pantomime. They talk, they sing, they dance, they do comedy bits and numbers and what have you. In other words, it's a fairy story. And in this nursery was all the toys, his rocking horse and them, but many of the toys were human beings. They just stood quite still all the time. So another boy and I played a couple of gollywogs. Those are those rag dolls. You probably know them. So that was my first...
That was your first taste of people laughing when you...
Yeah, we used to do little comedy bits and, Then I went with a show called The House that Jack Built. It was for the same outfit. It was a juvenile panto. And after that, I went into a dramatic show and did a comedy part called Alone in the World. It was an American show. The author was an American. I think he wrote The Fatal Wedding. It was a very famous old-time dramatic play. So this was another one of his shows. And it was just a little touring company, it wasn't anything.
What happened from there?
Oh, Lord, now it's starting to get varied. I had a crack at vaudeville. In those days, it was quite a thing to be a boy comic. A boy comedian, you would be billed. But I didn't last too long at that. The strange thing, I was never too successful as a single comic.
No?
I always had more success with team.
Did you work as a team before you went with Oliver?
I had several teams. I had a trio. We started out first as 3 English comiques. And then we later changed the name to the Keystone Trio. And then...
Why Keystone?
Well, because I did the Chaplin impersonation, and the other
Keystone.
boy did Chester Conklin, and his wife played in the act. She did Mabel Norman. So it was quite a hit in those days. Chaplin was just coming up, and he was very popular, so just kind of caught on.
In your work before you teamed with the big team, had you always played the same type of character you personally?
Oh, no, I varied a great deal. In those days, I parted my hair in the middle. I was a different style. In fact, I had no particular style. I was just fishing around and trying to find myself, as you might say.
What led to the
I don't know. It just developed for some reason, rather. Just developed.
There's no one person you can say.
No, I don't think there's anybody can lay claim to. It just evolved. The same with Hardy.
As the characterizations that were to become world famous evolved, so did Stan Laurel's techniques of comedy development. Stan was the principal writer, gag man, or creator of the team. Where did he find comedy material?
You unconsciously remember things. You put another point to it. You see something. It's like writing stories and everything. Everyone has something from somewhere. You visualize a situation and what could have happened. Might be very funny. Because we turn tragedy into comedy. Many of our stories are shorts. Could have and have been used in feature pictures as serious material. We took the other line there, the humorous side of it. At times there was a little pathos. I think it's good for a comic. It's necessary for a comic to have pathos.
Would you want to leave them that way, though, at the end of the film?
Not necessarily. Sometimes it just depends. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Now, we have many fine comics so did have in England. But Chaplin was one. He could have them laughing 1 minute and crying the next, a lump in the throat. That's a great artist, I think.
Today, the work of Laurel and Hardy is regarded by many as a fine art. Other comics study their films and make the long trek to the Santa Monica apartment to talk with Stan. What did the contemporary critics think of the films as they were released between 1926 and 1945?
No, in fact, they ignored us. Occasionally they say, ha-ha.
Whether this melody is hummed by Stan Laurel himself or played by the BBC Orchestra, it means one thing around the world: Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy.
Well, there was a little radio station at the Road Studio in those days. There was a little program from 7 till 8, I think, called the Cuckoo Hour. And that was a little strain of the theme that they used at the start and the close of the program. But they did piano numbers, and they told jokes and just advertising in between. It was a little insignificant station. So we had this one morning with the tune, the little cuckoo thing, tickled us, and we thought, let's get a recording made of it and put it in one of our pictures at the opening to see what the reaction would be. And the audience laughed at it. So I think Roach gave the guy $50 for the rights to it. That's nothing, you know. So it became quite popular. It became our trademark. The Boston Symphony Orchestra made a beautiful overture of it.
Oh. I suppose they've ever recorded it,
I heard it. People have told me it was on the air Well, I never did hear it, and I was never able to get a copy of it. But it was done by the Boston Symphony Orchestra. And then the Columbia Orchestra in London also made one.
How do other comics of today view the work of Laurel and Hardy? We asked veteran comedian Gene Sheldon.
This, I think, is a great marriage of talents. That's why I think these two are so beautifully, I don't know, what's the word, for each other. There is, although they're both baggy pants comics in that sense, they're still completely and absolutely different characters. Oliver Hardy plays, if it's possible, a bashful con man, if there could be such a thing, with his little twiddling of the tie and the looking down and all. While Stan, of course, plays just the stupid oaf, the child, as I say, who just isn't quite aware of what's going on. I think that the kind of comedy Laurel and Hardy do, and I know the kind of comedy I do, an audience is able to put themselves, each member of that audience can put himself into a like situation, something that very possibly might have happened to him sometime during his life, and when he sees it happen to someone else, it suddenly becomes funny. Stan Laurel, strangely enough, is not as unbelievable a character as you would at first believe. He does things that a child would actually do. You can see children. I see kids doing double takes 10 and 12 times a day. As a matter of fact, I have a 2-year-old whose actions and moves I study every day of the world when I'm home, because he does some delightful takes and things, you know. They're just wonderful.
They present the art of comedy in its finest and truest light, and
stage, screen, and TV comedian Jules Munchen.
On television, they occasionally play Laurel and Hardy movies, and it's really something to see. The fantastic creations, the moments, the little gem-like things they do, and also their ability to sustain their characters completely, fully, and thoroughly. They're great, great artists. The fact that these men both are blessed with a comic gift, something that is God-given. It's not anything you can develop. They have a manner of expression, a manner of physical movement, a manner of comic interpretation. And secondly, they are very skilled technicians. They're very great artists. Their manner of relating to one another, the manner of playing the truth, the method, the technique is fantastic. That's why they're funny.
He probably was the first guy to really do takes.
How do you mean a take? What is a take?
Television and film comedian and pie-tossing expert, Soupy Sales.
Somebody played a trick or, did a joke on somebody. They just, they go on with the next bit. This was a take to the screen where they had a close-up of his face where he showed expression to the screen what Laurel had done to him. And it was very funny. It was very effective. He would turn right around and look right into the camera. And that's something, in the movies they never did. I mean, they never did look into the camera. You notice even today, nobody looks into the camera. You're always playing off to a little angle of it. But he did an actual take right into the camera to denote his dissatisfaction or his, he was really appalled by this thing that Laurel had done.
He also did the business with his hand on his face.
Oh, yeah, the hand on the face, and, with the tie, and he was just they were just two funny guys.
Well, I have never had the pleasure of meeting either of them. Of course, one now, Hardy, is dead.
Joined by 3 University of Detroit professors, Hans Conried.
Evidently, publicity, with all due respect to the two gentlemen of that profession who are here with us today, was not as effective as it should have been in their time, and they were, particularly in this country, where they worked most, were least appreciated. Somehow the law, they did well financially and success, but actually the critical awards
why have they
were
caught
withheld.
on?
The law in Spanish-speaking countries, South America, they were enormous. In England, they were regarded highly, but England is English standards can be much higher than ours and much lower. The English appreciation is no criterion. Their music hall heroes.
Gracefield,
Gracefield is great, getting far afield. For us, in our craft, the presumption on their part of what we call telegraphing, to let the audience know. Well, there is always a theory in the theater. The audience must be just one step ahead of the actor. They must know which panel is going to open and from which panel the corpse will fall. They know the boy is going to fall in love with the girl just before the light enters his eyes. But they would telegraph a joke. You would see it coming 3 minutes before.
And they telegraph.
Where he would ask him, extend your or loosen your suspenders, and the pants would come half down. Then extend the belt line, and he would draw the pants forward. And then you would know that he's going to reach over and get that bucket of cold water and dump it down the front of his pants. And the audience would, and that presumption, no other clown, no other comedian would have dared take.
I remember that Stan Laurel is a personality by itself, even without Hardy. He plays in the great tradition of the clownery of the Italian Zani.
The great French pantomimist Marcel Marceau.
Starring face, par exemple, Stan Laurel a le masque naïf, pathétique, humain, enfantin du clown. Son masque obéit à des lois mécaniques du théâtre, l'absurdité dans les moments tragiques, dans les moments comiques. Stan Laurel a été, et il est encore, pour moi, il restera un grand mime qui a su adapter son art au cinéma. They knew that the comic has to be built on 3 situations. Comique de caractère, comique de situation, and comique de contraste, de mœurs, ou même de contraste. That is, comique de caractère is they are very different one another, and they fight one against the other or one with the other, and they establish a contrast. Comique de situation, they are involved in troubles which make clear their different size, their different volumes, their different characters. Comique de mœurs is that you can see why they are different one from the other, and you can compare them, and they establish real laws. For instance, when we laugh not only because the thing is funny by itself, because we remember something which happens sometimes to us. For instance, we will not laugh from a man who stumbles, who falls. We will laugh from this man when he falls, but he wants to keep his dignity. We will laugh, for instance, we will not laugh from a hat. A man has a funny hat. We don't laugh because it's a funny hat. We find the hat funny because this hat remembers us an animal or the face of a man, of a woman we know. Laugh is a question of society. When we laugh with Stan, Laurel, and Hardy, because we know that if Stan makes something wrong, Hardy will react towards Stan, and we identify with Stan. That is, Hardy is exactly the crowd which surrounds Chaplin. For instance, Chaplin fights with policemen, and Hardy has to fight always with Stan, and Stan has to fight with Hardy. And when you see the size of Hardy, you could see that he would smash down the poor Stan who is so thin. You see, they knew, that's why Chaplin used also big men. When he, in Gold Rush, for instance, he uses a big man into the policeman. He's a small policeman, the law against the brutal force, Goliath, you see. And Stan, Laurel, and Hardy knew exactly these laws of the theater, these laws of the eternal commedia dell'arte story. That is, law of contrast, laws of creating different types, and I think that that's why they have teamed together so perfectly. They have developed then a real comedy of character. We have not to worry of what would have arrived if Stan Laurel would have played alone, because he has done with Hardy, he has written a great page in the history of the screen.
I think they were splendid, don't you? They were low comedy, broad comedy, if you like, but very subtle.
Veteran film and stage actor Arthur Treacher talks with producer Bill Rabe.
Did you ever see them on the stage?
No. No. Never did. I saw them in pictures first. I used to watch them when they made pictures occasionally if I was there. And I knew Hardy better than I knew Laurel, Stan Laurel. I knew Hardy because he played a lot of golf and so on. But I think they were just delicious.
What was there about their work you think that was important and made them so good?
Well, they played, you see, farce completely sincerely. That is the art of it, isn't it? I mean, they played it dead straight. It was important to them what they said. And when they got into all that trouble, so you've got to get people into trouble.
Yeah.
You know, like W.C. Fields got into trouble, and you get him into trouble. If he starts to be funny he doesn't want to be funny in a farce. He wants to just play that straight.
Yeah, it's a different kind.
Yeah, there's very few people can do it anymore, you know.
Looking at the Laurel and Hardy films, contemporary comics find more satisfaction than Stan Laurel himself does, as he recalls some of the trials and tribulations of creative artists. How did he regard one film, Swiss Miss, that is regarded as one of his funniest by many?
Well, I thought it lacked very much because Hal Roach and I, we differed a great deal on story ideas and gags and what have you. And we didn't get along too well on that picture. We disagreed very much. And I, along with the other writers, of course, when he told the writers to write this or that, they wrote it that way. Although they disagreed with the way it was being handled. And they were all for my version of it. But we just couldn't sell it to Roach.
Well, I've heard that story about the piano key being keyed to the TN.
Yeah, well, that was just
why
a little
this was
instance.
out, yeah.
I'll never know why he did that. We had the sequence of taking the piano across the bridge, the swaying bridge. Anyway, the planning the piano, the chef in the hotel was played that he hated music. Music annoyed him. It just drove him crazy. So this composer came to the hotel, and all night he would be composing. And this chef couldn't stand this music, especially waking him up in his sleep. He was going mad. So he decided to put a bomb in this piano. So when he struck a note, it would blow the piano to pieces, you know, and hope that the other guy wouldn't be too bad. Anyway, I suggested this bomb idea to make the scene on the bridge give it more power. Because here we are on the swinging bridge, going how high up and touching this one note, which we just kept missing in the handling of it. It had a lot of suspense. But he says, no, I don't want the bomb. We shot it all, and then he took out the scene where the guy put the bomb in the piano. So all our business of messing around over the keys, which seemed nothing in the film, there was no reason for it. And I'll never know why.
But his displeasure with the Laurel and Hardy films leaves Stan Laurel in a minority group. The president of a Laurel and Hardy study club newly formed explains his organization.
The Sons of the Desert is an organization which we hope will be to Laurel and Hardy what the Baker Street Irregulars, etc., are to Sherlock Holmes. We will meet once a year, have some good company of people that are somehow connected with the world of comedy, either as writers or performers or producers or something, and who love Laurel and Hardy. Jackie Gleason is an enormous fan of Laurel and Hardy's, Johnny Carson, many people in show business. My name is Orson Bean, Harvard 48, Yale nothing. I am an enormous fan of Laurel and Hardy's. Recently in France, Laurel and Hardy, in a survey, I don't know how many thousands of people voted in this thing, but they picked Laurel and Hardy as their all-time favorite comedian over Chaplin. sometimes people are amazed to hear something like this, because while they think of Laurel and Hardy as amusing, they don't think of them as great. Somehow Laurel and Hardy have missed becoming, having snob appeal until relatively recently. People like W.C. Fields and, of course, Chaplin, Buster Keaton are idolized as great masters, and Laurel and Hardy are looked at as, well, just funny fellows. But there has been a small and growing group of people who think that Laurel and Hardy are the greatest, and this is one of the reasons for the emergence of this organization, the Sons of the Desert.
Stan Laurel knew what he was doing and what he was about when he worked out the famous comedies for himself and his partner. But he still doesn't analyze. A typical reaction.
At what point does the
Now,
audience...
don't ask me what makes anything funny, because that's an impossible...
Oh, at what point do the people start laughing, though?
It's hard to tell. Some don't laugh. Just depends how it appeals to people. I've gone into theaters and been a sensation, and gone around the corner the next 3 days, and you wouldn't know I was on the stage. The same audiences, same neighborhood, same class of people. The same theater, it's a stage, it's the same act that I did around the corner 3 or 4 days before. And they laid in the aisles. Come around the corner of this other house. It's the same neighborhood entirely. And just a big flop.
Stan was a little, I think, appalled initially, the idea of a book, because I think in genuine modesty and humility, he thought that Laurel and Hardy might not be worth a book. He said, well, after all, we just did our job, we played comedy, and that's all we could do. And really, what is there to write a book about?
Oh, well, I mean, there was just 2 real comics. I mean, that wasn't art.
Just 2 real comics, he said. That wasn't art. We've touched on some of the details of the Laurel and Hardy films, but let's go back to the beginning and find out how Stan Laurel switched from the stage to movies. Again, as interviewed in Santa Monica by Bill Rabe.
Well, my first experience in pictures was a fellow that was running a circuit out here, Adolph Ramish. He had a theater here, the Hippodrome. And I was playing on the Hippodrome circuit, as they called it. At various points, he caught my act. So when we got to Los Angeles, he asked me if I'd ever been in pictures or had any idea, and I said no. He said, well, he says, how would you like to make some comedies for me? He says, we'll make a couple and see how they turn out. So that's how I got my first start in pictures. I made a 2-reeler, and I made a 1-reeler, and they were previewed at the Hippodrome. And Carl Laemmle of the Universal City of those days, he was a friend of Ramish, and he came down to the previews, and he made a contract with Ramish for me. In those days, any new comic would come onto the lot. I mean, the knives are all out.
What was your characterization at this time? Were you
similar to what I was doing in the act. My hair was part in the middle. I used to wear a slight red nose, shading red nose, and baggy pants, umbrella. I wouldn't know what you would call it.
Well, and when did Oliver Hardy, Little Bell stops during Ship Bell?
Yeah.
When did you first see Oliver Hardy then?
Well, Hardy, I first made a picture for Bronco Billy Anderson. I'd never met him, and he called me up one night and asked me to come down to the hotel. That he would like to have me make a series of pictures. So at that time, we had no studio, so we rented space at the Celix Zoo studio here. And he'd had, when he had the studio in Niles, California, at the time Chaplin was with him, and Ben Turpin, and Wally Beery, and Gloria Swanson. They were called S&E pictures. Well, he had a director with him at that time called Jess Robbins, who is now directing over at Vitagraph Studio with Larry Seaman. So Anderson called him up and says, I got a new comic, I want you to make this pilot picture with him. So Robbins happened to be between pictures with Seaman. So he brought his cameraman over to direct this picture with me, and also brought Hardy, who Hardy was doing the heavies for Seaman. But Hardy, Babe as we call him later, didn't wear any mustache, he just played a heavy part. It was mostly for chase at those type of days. So that's the first time that I met Babe, but only for 2 or 3 days, and then I didn't see him for probably 2 or 3 years after. Till later he came down to the Halroad studio, where I was now writing, directing, in a gag man capacity. So I was making a picture with Clyde Cook, and Babe got into stock at the studio. We had a little stock company there. So I used Babe many times in whatever pictures I was making. And finally we were ready to go on a picture on the Monday, and on the Friday before, Babe burnt his arm pretty bad. He used to love to cook at home. This afternoon he was cooking the roast of lamb, and the pan fell out the oven, and the hot grease burnt his arm. So he wasn't able to go into the picture on the Monday. So at the last minute, Roach says, well, you better go in. He couldn't find anybody to play it. So at the last minute, I went in and played it all my idea of it. Of course, had to be changed from the way Hardy looked. Anyway, Roach liked it, the preview, and says, keep yourself in for the next one. So in a couple of weeks or so, Hardy was back, and the next one was a picture with Priscilla Dean and Herb Rawlinson. I'm trying to think what the name of that picture was. Anyway, Babe and I were in that picture, although we went as a team. We did come together in the picture, although we had no connection in the story. So Roach liked that one, says keep on doing that, and I kept on making the pictures, and finally it evolved. Roach just would make the Laurel Hardy comedies, that's all. So from then on, it just evolved and developed. The characters evolved, they developed.
Laurel and Hardy biographer John McCabe answers the question, how did they make their films? Annotated from time to time by Stan Laurel's latter-day recollections.
Well, they made their films in as simple a way as I think one can do anything. They had an idea, and they developed the idea. Now, if that may sound too basic, let me say this, that anybody can get an idea, but it's taking the idea, extending it, and doing improvisations on the idea, particularly in the world of comedy, that makes great comedy. So Laurel and Hardy would simply take something so simple as to seem unbelievably so, and they would extend their humor from this one simple little object. Frequently, it was just nothing more than an object. Or it could be a comedy concept that was so old as to seem outdated, which they updated and new-dated. For example, they were sitting around the studio one day, and this was 1925, and one of the gag men said, look, why don't we make a pie picture? And the other gag men sat in stunned silence, and one of them said, "A pie picture? My word, man, that went out at least 15 years ago." But Stan said, "No, wait a minute. If we make a pie picture, let's make a pie picture to end all pie pictures. Let's make a pie picture that has so many pies in it that nobody else will ever want to make a pie picture ever after." So they did just that. The second film they made, called The Battle of the Century, consists of nothing but thousands and thousands of pies. And literally, and I say thousands and thousands, I mean that. They bought out the one day's output from the Los Angeles Pie Company, and these were real pies. These weren't studio make-ups or mock-ups. They were custard, cream, lemon, apple, or the whole gamut of piedom. And they took all the pies together, and they started out with one of their very basic little tricks, which is what I have called in the book the reciprocal destruction device. Stan throws a pie at a man and hits him. This is done accidentally, as I remember. And the man then throws it at Stan, but instead of hitting Stan, it hits Ollie. Ollie, in turn, throws it back at the man, but misses him and hits another man. This other man picks up a pie, throws it back at Ollie, hits another person, and so on, extending this pie-throwing gamut into a very long and extended series of reciprocal destruction. Each person who gets involved in this pie throwing, and it finally extends itself down a whole city block long, gradually becomes more and more involved in it until you have the final shot, which is a glorious melee of at least 50 people, all of them doing nothing but throwing pies, and real pies. It's one of the great moments of silent film comedy.
Disgusted, and he won't even talk to me. I'm just sitting there when those things. Anyway, a fellow called Jim Paulette comes along, you may know, and he's selling insurance, cheap insurance. For $1, Hardy can insure me. Trying for a broken arm, you get $150 for a broken back, it'd be $2,000, and a broken leg, and so forth. And he says, "How much is this for $1?" You know, he's one of these fast guys. So Hardy comes over to me and says, "Give me that $1." So I said, "Well," he says, "Give me the $1. What's the matter with you?" So I give it to him, and he takes out this phony insurance, just an alibi to get started. So from then on, Hardy's trying to get me hurt. So he's walking me under ladders. Of course, he gets the brunt of everything. Brake drops on there. Tries to put me in front of a streetcar. Another one comes along the other way, and knocks him for a loop. You know, all kinds of guys. Finally, he passes a fruit stand and sees these bananas, and he takes a banana off. And you start walking down the street, and he peels this banana. He throws the banana in back of him. And he says, "Oh, I think we better go this way. I want to see something." And he turns me around, hoping that I'll walk over it and slip and break my leg, or, you know, that was the purpose. But of course, I step over it. I don't know it's even there, you see. I'm looking like. Then he walks me back and forth. But it happens that it fell in front of a bakery store. This bakery is coming. He's got the wagon at the curb and coming out with his tray of pies. And he slips on the skin. All these pies. So Hardy right away takes the banana, which he hasn't eaten even, and he sticks into my hand. The bakery saw it, this bakery guy. So he says, "I saw you give the banana." He said, "Try to blame it on my little fellow." Oh, and he picks up the pie and he so I get mad, so I go to pick up a pie, and I don't know whether I rub it or he rubs one onto me before I get to it. Well, it starts back and forth like this. Then a passerby comes in and says, "Look, fellas, you shouldn't." He says, "You keep out of this." And he says, "What do you mean?" And somebody else says, "What's going on here?" He says, "Oh, don't bother." The postman opened the mailbox to pick out the mail. The pie came into there, and he's handed over the mail. Cut to a window. Inside is the dentist, and the guy's a mother getting the fender parked of it. You know, you never saw where they came from, but every gang was a belly laugh, you know. Before you know, it snowballed, and the whole town is eventually pies. I'm in the wagon head of the bus.
Also, they would take something like an object. They would take a goat, or, in the case of their great film, The Chimp, a chimpanzee. And the chimpanzee would simply follow them around, and they would try to get rid of the chimp. Finally, they would take it to their boarding house, causing great havoc there and destruction, and they'd take it to bed with them, and they upset the entire household with noise-making and so on, finally destroying the room in which they lived. Or sometimes the film idea would come from a geographical site, as, for example, their greatest film in the short category, which is called The Music Box. The idea for that derived from a long terrace of steps, and the device was to get a piano up those steps. Well, the multiple difficulties and humorous complications from getting that piano up the steps, of course, constitute comedy of the first water. The film, indeed, was so great that it won them their only Academy Award. A great film.
Well, we asked where number so-and-so house was, and they said, that's it, the top of the stoop. Top of the stoop. There's about 18 steps. So anyway, we start up, and we have our troubles getting up there. We finally get up there, and the postman comes along, and he says, do you bring the piano up the steps? And he said, yeah. He says, why don't you drive around the road? He says, it comes right up here, the street. So we pick up the piano and we take it down again to drive us.
In the years when sound film came into Hollywood, Hollywood was in a great state of chaos, as we all know. The classic example of what happened then is John Gilbert. We frequently hear that the trouble with John Gilbert was that he had a high, squeaky voice, and he just didn't last when sound came in. Well, the fact is that John Gilbert did not have a high, squeaky voice, and that's been pointed out, or I hope it's been pointed out since, when you saw him in Queen Christina with Garbo in the mid-30s. His voice was all right. The trouble was that the sound equipment was not all right. It was very, very imperfect, and the fact, the trouble was that too many people started to do nothing but talk. Well, this happened to the comedians too. A lot of the comics thought, well, here we have to go. We've got to chatter, 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 and they did nothing but chatter. And Laurel and Hardy made a respectful obeisance toward sound. They tipped their hats politely to sound, but they weren't too impressed by it because they continued on with their basic pantomimic work. They continued to employ just their pantomime as their principal comedy argument. But they were not at all afraid of sound in this sense, that when they realized that sound could be made to help them, they certainly took sound up and nourished it to their bosoms. In this way, I can think of one way offhand. There is a comic device which has now become so standard in sound film as to be a cliche, but Laurel and Hardy invented this. You probably have seen Bugs Bunny cartoons in which Bugs hits some unfortunate bear over the head, and we hear the sound effect of an anvil. This was a direct, not a steal, let's say, to be polite, but a lifting from one of the early Laurel and Hardy sound films. When Stan hit Ollie over the head, the soundtrack was substituted with an anvil sound. And this has since become, as I say, a standard device. They were the inventors of another cliche of sound, and also a principle of editing, by the way. When at one time Ollie was going to fall downstairs, Stan thought it over and thought to himself, well, no, there's nothing really funny about a man falling downstairs. Let's see if we can soup this up a little bit. Let's see if we can't give a little twist of the imagination to this. So he kept the what is called the establishing shot of the two of them sort of teetering on the edge of the stairway, and then he let Ollie roll downstairs deliberately out of camera range. But the camera remained on Stan, who stood there horrified, and the soundtrack took over, and we heard the crish, crash, boom, boom, crash, bang, bang, crash, as Ollie fell downstairs. Now, the audience could not see Ollie falling downstairs, but they could hear him, and their imagination substituted a much funnier picture than if the camera had been allowed to follow Ollie down the stairs. Now, this has become a cliche in film comedy, but Laurel and Hardy invented it. And they did so many of these tiny little things, tiny little touches, that it's almost impossible, I suppose, to say, well, just what did Laurel and Hardy do? Name me something big that they did. They didn't do a lot of big things. They did a number of small things like this, which altogether constituted the total picture of two very ordinary but two terribly funny men doing ordinary things in an awfully funny way. That is their glory, and that is their chief glory, and is the glory which is going to keep them in film comedy, second only to Chaplin through the years to come, I'm sure.
Contributing to the spontaneity of their film comedy was an unusual Laurel and Hardy studio technique. Again, Stan Laurel and Bill Rabe.
Another thing I'd like to confirm, you shot all of your comedies in chronological order?
Yes.
Shot from beginning to end?
Right from beginning to end.
Has anyone else done this? Do you know?
I don't think so. They can't do it today. It's too expensive.
Did anyone object when you tried to do it?
Many times.
When you suggested it the first time?
Many times. And the only place I could do it was at Roach's. But anywhere else, they wouldn't go for that. And many times, it's just ruined the picture. Or the prospects of the picture. For instance, if they had scenes in the kitchen, I'm just saying this for example, if they had a lot of scenes in the kitchen where we came back and forth at different times. Well, today they shoot all those scenes in the kitchen at one time. Well, we couldn't do that because when we left the kitchen, we never knew what we were going to run into. So we couldn't come back with a black eye or covered with anything torn and dilapidated or whatever might have happened because the scene is already shot. So consequently, it killed us from getting any gags in on the outside. Same in the last picture we made in France. They had the shipwreck, the storm, the shipwreck, and then we're on the island. Well, they shot the island before they did the shipwreck. So it's awful difficult to try and figure out how you're going to look after a shipwreck. Or what, it stopped us from doing gags that I would have done. We were stymied, just handcuffed.
Was that picture ever released?
Oh, yes, unfortunately. Oh, it's a shocking thing.
Stanley Laurel and Oliver Hardy, who frequently referred to each other on the stage as Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, acquired a wide variety of names in foreign countries and languages. Dick and Dar, for example, in Germany, thick and thin. Their success in these countries was the result of a painstaking reshooting of the basic English language film in different languages, with Laurel and Hardy reading words they didn't understand in languages they couldn't otherwise speak. Laurel tells how this was done.
In the French, the Italian, Spanish, and the German versions. We played in every one, but the cast was each nationality.
But the two of you did each language in each film?
Yeah.
You went through each film 5 times?
Yeah.
Instead of dubbing the way they do today?
Yeah, well, that dubbing wasn't known. There was the early days of talkies, you know. We make the picture entirely in English, naturally. Then we preview it. So we get it cut and all ready for shipping. So then we knew exactly what we were going to use of the film. In other words, if we hadn't previewed it, we may have shot a lot of stuff that we weren't going to keep, you see. Anyway, the finished product was there. So then we brought in the French, German, Italian, and Spanish interpreters. And they translated our dialogue into each language. Then each interpreter brought his own company. People who spoke Spanish, people who spoke French, and so forth. Then we'd set up the camera for the first scene. He'd tell us our dialogue that we spoke in English, so we knew what it meant. But he'd tell us in French, for instance, and we'd write it phonetically as it sounded to us. But knowing the meaning of it, we got the correct intonation and what have you see, which is helpful. So we'd set up the camera and we'd do the French version, the first scene. After the first scene, we'd still hold the camera and we'd do the German scene. And each scene we did 4 times before we moved camera for each different change.
That sounds fantastic.
It was, believe me. But they understood us perfectly, and I think that's what made it so popular. So when we finally went over there, they were amazed that we couldn't speak their language.
Was this common in other films at that time, too?
They tried, but they weren't as successful as we were.
A day on the set with Laurel and Hardy. Bill Rabe interviews Stan Laurel.
You'd come into the sets. You're shooting in English, regular comedy. You'd have a script that was prepared.
Well,
what happened?
No, we don't have prepared scripts.
What did you have? What did you start with?
Well, we had a rough outline of story, and we used to talk over.
No lines.
Oh, we had lines to motivate what we were going to do or doing, or what the plot was about, naturally. But as far as Laurel and Hardy's scenes, routines, and gags, those were worked out practically on the set.
What would happen, that is, physically, how would this work out? Would you talk before you shot, or would you start shooting and change?
Well, you do that anyway. You rehearse a scene and try to improve it. If it looks okay, you shoot it. And if you think you can make it better, fine.
Would you make changes while you were actually shooting, though, in the middle of a scene?
Occasionally, maybe. Occasionally. Things would crop up and we'd kind of ad-lib into something else. But not too often. We were pretty well cut and dried.
How long a shooting did?
And we had a lot of mechanics. Sometimes they didn't work. Like an explosion where everything, all the walls fell down, the drapes and all that. All that was wires and what have you. Sometimes they got fouled up. Sometimes in the middle of a scene, a copter coming in the window. Said, "Did it work?" That's a killer.
How many Model Ts did you have?
We had specially made 1.5 circle that would go round and around. And then we had one that was squashed up between 2 cars.
Tall and thin.
It was tall. We were sitting high up in the air in the front seat. And then we had one that went into a railroad tunnel, and the train had come through at the other end, and we came out with the 4 wheels practically in line.
Incidentally, Marceau thinks that's the funniest thing you've ever done.
2 towers. There was no motors in them, you know. They were just breakaways. We had one that was all fitted together, and you pulled wires, and everything collapsed at one time.
I have a car like that now.
And so Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy became world famous. But public tastes in comedy change, and so do the formats of the media and the media themselves. The short subjects made way for double features. Laurel and Hardy changed studios. And finally, the great magic lantern that was the movies began to dim and make way for the little flashlight, television. Whence Laurel and Hardy? Their biographer, John McCabe, again.
In recent years, as I think most of us are aware, Laurel and Hardy have become popular all over again. It's one of the things that is very hard for a comedian to do if he wants to keep in the public eye. He's got to keep working. And unless you have a cast iron constitution, you just can't keep working all that time, or unless you establish a very workable way of life. Well, Laurel and Hardy certainly couldn't keep working all the time because of the knockabout, roustabout kind of activity in which they were engaged, the hard pantomimic work in which they worked. And it's a glory, of course, that they were able to do films. But, of course, even films, do wear out after a while, and they become old-fashioned. And such a thing happened during the late 30s and all during the 40s and the early 50s. The films of Laurel and Hardy suddenly became old hat. Well, what were they to do? First of all, they had ended a very happy and profitable tenure of years with Hal Roach in the early 40s, and then they made a very ill-advised step. They did a number of films for 20th Century Fox and MGM that were, to put it minimally, horrible films, and they were themselves aware that they were horrible, but they were forced to do things the studio way, not their way, and so they found themselves, in a sense, in oblivion. They decided that they would go back to their first love, and that was the vaudeville stage, and they made a couple of tours of England. They were very popular there. They came back to the States, but after doing some years of this, they came back in 1953, and they really were too old to do the kind of knockabout comedian stuff that they had been doing. And in a sense, they were dispirited. They knew that they were still funny, and they could do the kind of work that they were able to do when not too much piano lifting was involved, and much of that, of course, was quite funny. But there didn't seem to be any kind of call for their services. Fortunately, television caught them up, and the kids took them to their bosoms, and the kids loved them. And a phenomenon swept this country about the mid-50s. Laurel and Hardy suddenly became as popular as any comedians in the country. And so the mail started to flood in. Where were Laurel and Hardy? Were they still alive? Were they still making films? And they were not making films, but they were very anxious to make them. And Hal Roach's son, Hal Roach Jr., decided he would strike while the iron was hot. He signed them to do a 10-picture commitment in color, 1-hour comedy films, all of them done in the style of the English music hall pantomime, Babes in the Woods kind of thing, and they were to be done in color, and they were to be presented both on TV and in the playhouses, in theaters. And just 10 days before shooting was to start, Stan Laurel had a stroke. It was not a big stroke, as strokes go, but it was enough to keep him from working. Not too long after, Babe Hardy had a stroke as well, and only his was a gigantic one, and a few years later he died. But it is, I think, one of the most glorious things about the working relationship between these two men, that at the very end of their lives, they knew that they were very much in demand. They knew that the public still loved them. Their fan mail never really abated through these years, and toward the end, the fan mail grew and grew and grew. And it was one of the joys of Babe Hardy's lifetime as he lay dying to contemplate the fact that there was so much love that was being given him and his partner. And I suspect the reason why there was so much love given to Laurel and Hardy was because if they did anything else with their films, they put into them deep, deep love.
Thank you, Dr. McCabe. Now let's go back in time. Their movies were behind Laurel and Hardy, but the Dance of the Cuckoos was still with them. And so Laurel and Hardy and the Dance of the Cuckoos took to the road.
Well, we played France, Belgium, Denmark, and Sweden. Sweden.
What was the language a problem, or did you use less and less
It wasn't
English?
a problem in Belgium. Or was it in Denmark?
Og så fløjter vi alle på nu kommer fløj og klokke.
The year is 1948. The place, Copenhagen, Denmark. And the Copenhagen audience, it hasn't forgotten Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your very cordial reception. Stan and I would like to tell you how glad we are to be here in this beautiful city of Esbjerg. You see, we came... Stan just corrected me. I really meant to say Odensee. You see? No. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in the summer of 1932...
Could I say something?
Stanley... I am speaking to the ladies and gentlemen. As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, Stan and I had the pleasure of coming to Copenhagen in the summer of 19... Oh! If I remember correctly, it was quite warm that summer. Will you pardon me just a moment, please? What is it?
You're standing on my foot, I can't...
What about those golden days of radio? Did Laurel and Hardy have a go before the sightless microphone?
We never talked. We made one recording down at, I don't know whether it's NBC or CBS. They wanted to make a recording to see if it would be okay for a show, radio show. Nothing developed from it. I don't think we were too good. We were more of a sight comics than talking.
I've heard that short thing you did in BBC.
Well, we were on a couple of times, I believe. I never did hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Oliver Hardy speaking. I'm taking this opportunity of thanking you and the countless friends in the British Isles for the wonderfully wholehearted reception you have given me on my first visit to your beautiful country. Words cannot describe my feelings of... Never before have I been received... Never before have I been... Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen. I think my friend Mr. Laurel wishes to speak to me. What's on your mind?
What about mentioning me in the speech?
Don't worry, I'll get to you in just a few minutes.
In a few minutes?
Certainly.
Well, the record will be over in a few minutes, then you won't be able to...
Listen, why don't you do something to help me?
Oh, what can I do?
Here's a hard-boiled egg. Eat that and just relax.
Thank you, Ollie.
Now, let's see where I was. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, this is Oliver Hardy speaking. I'm taking this opportunity of thanking you and the countless friends in the British Isles for the wonderfully wholehearted reception you have given me on my first visit to your beautiful country.
Ollie.
What?
Speak up.
What for?
I can't hear you.
But if you'll get that egg down, you'll be able to hear me much better.
I just did get the egg down.
What'd you do with the eggshell?
What eggshell?
Don't tell me you've eaten the egg with the shell on it.
Well, I didn't know. You didn't tell me anything about it. You don't happen to have another one, do you?
No, I haven't.
Have you got any nuts?
No, I haven't got any nuts.
Well, what'd you do with those we brought in New York?
Oh, I left them in my wardrobe trunk.
Where is your trunk? Maybe we could go get them.
Oh, that reminds me. Where is my trunk? I haven't seen it for several days.
Have you felt in all your pockets?
Now, that's a good idea. I'll take a look. What do you mean, have I felt in all my pockets? Will you please stop annoying me while I make this speech?
No, I'm not annoying you. I'm not doing
now,
anything.
keep quiet.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Stop wiggling your tie.
What do you mean, stop wiggling my tie?
Well, every time you get fancy, you start wiggling your tie, and it looks silly.
If you interrupt me again, I'll wiggle you. What are you crying for?
I don't want to be wiggled.
Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to speak to my friend privately. What are you trying to do? Spoil my speech?
No, that's impossible.
You bet your life it's impossible.
That's the first time you've agreed with me, Ollie.
Oh, you're getting sarcastic, huh?
No, I'm not.
Well, just for that, you make a speech.
I don't want to make a speech.
Oh, yes, you will make a speech.
I don't know anything about it.
Go ahead.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen.
With your hat off.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Ladies and gentlemen, with your hat off.
Oh, you don't say that.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, without your hat off.
Go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, you'll never know how happy we are to be here with you tonight in Chicago, America.
Oh,
it's the first...
We're in London, you fool. London.
Well, I didn't know. I've been traveling to so many places, I wasn't quite sure just where we were.
Well, go ahead. It won't make any difference anyway.
So this is London, eh?
Yes, London.
Ladies and gentlemen,
You said that once.
All right. I'm so happy to be here with you tonight in London, Scotland.
No, that's done it. No more speeches.
What do you mean, no more speeches? We've got to do something.
All right. Maybe I can sing a little song.
That's a good idea. Oh, say, that reminds me.
What?
I wish I brought my piano with me from America.
You don't have to bring a piano all the way from America. There's plenty here.
I know, but I wish I'd brought mine.
Now, why in your wildest dreams do you wish you'd brought your piano with you?
Well, you won't be mad at me if I tell you, will you?
Oh, no. You know I couldn't really get mad with you.
No, I'd rather not tell you. I'd rather...
Come on now. Why do you wish that you'd brought your piano with you?
Well, I left our return tickets lying on top of it, and I couldn't...
That was, of course, the broadcast Stanley Laurel Never Heard on the BBC in London, 1947. Their tour that season also found them in Belgium, once again reviving their old driving license skit for the vaudeville stage. As usual, an unsuspecting public servant, little knowing what he is about to become involved in, opens by saying,
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Well, what can I do for you?
We'd like to get a new driving license, please.
Certainly. Just fill in this application form and return it to me.
Well, I'm sorry, sir, but I can't write.
And get your friend to fill it in for you.
Well, you see, sir, he can write, but he can't read. No.
Oh, well, what are we going to do about it?
Well, we thought, sir, that maybe you would be kind enough to fill it in for us.
Well, as a rule, I don't do this sort of thing, but under the circumstances, I'll break the rule.
Thank you. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you so much. He doesn't mean that kind of rule.
Oh. Now, what's your name?
Oliver N. Hardy, and this is my good friend, Mr. Laurel. How do you do, sir? I'm very happy.
What was that name again?
Oliver N. Hardy.
Oliver N. Hardy. What's the N stand for?
Henry. Henry?
You do not write Henry with an N.
Of course you don't. You write it with a pencil. Whoever heard of it? We never will get this right.
Now, what's your address?
234 South Main.
234 South Main Street.
Oh, that was before we moved. Yeah.
And what did you move for?
Well, you see, sir, we couldn't get the landlord to raise our rent. No.
Now, what the landlord to raise your rent for?
Well, we couldn't raise it, could we?
No,
In the long days and evenings back in America, the television set plays an important part in the life in that Santa Monica apartment for Stan Laurel, as it does for millions of Americans. What about his own films on TV? A completely new generation has taken them to its heart, and other generations have rediscovered them. Bill Rabe asks,
how do you like watching your own pictures on television?
I never watched them. Well, the trouble you see with these, they were made for an audience. You take any of the long, hardy pictures in the projection room, they look terrible. There doesn't seem to be a laugh in any of them, you know. You'll see the pictures on TV look so slow. Some scenes you think will never end. But the reaction in the theater with an audience, they're laughing all through this. In the home, you're just looking at a couple or three people, and they're wondering what you're standing still for, what are you mugging for? So they're just all out of context, really.
A performer is measured for today by his own work, and for tomorrow by his influence on his fellow performers now and forever. Does Stan Laurel watch other performers on TV? How does he evaluate their work, and how do they credit him for their own development? Again, Bill Rabe asked if he watched much TV.
Well, that's about all I can. My favorite today is Joey Bishop. I think he's terrific. Bishop is a great style, and very nice with it. He's not loud, and he's very, very witty. He has a nice personality, pleasing, not in the least offensive.
What about the people who've tried pantomime on television? You think this comes over?
Well, you mean like Skelton?
Yes.
Skelton is very good. Very good. I like his pantomime. Excellent. I like him in the tramp outfit. Well, the trouble is there's so many comics. And all comics are using basic material. I mean, if an idea or something new has been done, it might be done by 2 or 3 comics. And then the big comic comes along and he says, well, I can't do it. I can't use the material over again.
Laurel and Hardy have form. The comedians of today, and there are many of them that
Comedian
are
Orson
funny,
Bean on their influence
but by and
on
large,
contemporary
they don't have
comics.
form. They may or may not have talent, and they may or may not make you laugh. But Laurel and Hardy had a form that could be studied by a student of comedy. For instance, you can't study Jonathan Winters and learn anything from it. All you can do is sit and roar at him, which I do. I think he's a genius. You can't study, for instance, Jerry Lewis and learn anything from him. You can either laugh at him or not, depending on your sense of humor, but there's nothing to be learned from it. But Stan and Ollie had predictable things and predictable attitudes towards any given comic situation, and if you watched them long enough, you saw what the predictable attitudes were and why they were funny, at least if you had interest in finding out why, other than just laughing. You could learn something from it.
I think it's one of the greatest pantomimes we have.
Stan Laurel, concerning French pantomimist Marcel Marceau.
Many are copying him. But he's a great, great artist.
I met Stan Laurel in 1950 for the first time in Paris. He saw our show and became very good friends. I met him again in 51 in England, in London, where I played. And when we went to Hollywood in 1955, we went to Santa Monica to visit him.
How is he today?
Oh, he's a marvelous man. Of course, we didn't see Hardy. Unfortunately, we know that Hardy died, but I never met Hardy.
What did Stan Laurel have to do as far as your career was concerned in promoting you, letting other people know about you? Had he been helpful in that area?
Well, I think that when I met in 1950 Stan Laurel, you know there is a proverb which says you are not a prophet in your own country. And when I started in the first years, he came to see our show and he made some declaration to the press. And he said that I was, well, I cannot say myself what he said because it's too nice, really, what he said. But he he made clear that he recognized in me a real mime of our time, and that was a great tribute for me, because he had this time in 1950 he had a great, how could I say it in English? He was an authority, and I just started really, and he helped me very much in this way. And when I saw him in London, because he's English, he's in his own country. In London, he went to see our show. He everywhere said that they found that we were the real continuer, the follow. How could we say in English? It's so difficult sometimes. That we continue the real tradition of mime, and he helped us very much this way. I saw many of the Laurel and Hardy films, and really they attracted me when I was very young, and they affected me very much. How I thought about that, I didn't analyze them, but I know that I just laughed very much. When I saw them both, the contrast between them was so exciting that I couldn't help myself to be very attracted by their art, and I think it had some influence also about me.
When good fellows get together to talk about these two funny fellows, no conversation is complete without an exchange of opinions and debate on their funniest bit. Agreement can sometimes be reached on their funniest long film or funniest short film, but the debate is endless about their favorite bits. Hans Conried remembers when.
Would ask him, extend your or loosen your suspenders, and the pants would come half down, then extend the belt line, and he would draw the pants forward, and then you would know that he's going to reach over and get that bucket of cold water and dump it down the front of his pants, and the audience would.
Television comedian Soupy Sales, a great pie-toss man himself.
The bit that really broke me up was the time I forget the name of it, they were doing a war bit, and he told him, they were advancing, and he told him to wait there, he'd be back for him. And the war was over like 20 years, and they cut back, and he's still in the trench, and he's sitting on about 15,000 bean cans.
Pantomimist Marcel Marceau.
For instance, when with a finger they put a flame, or the finger, when they made tricks with the hands, and when Laurel was crying and suddenly laughing, when he was always out of the time, that is, he made the wrong thing, and Hardy wanted to make the real thing.
President of the Laurel and Hardy Study Club, the Sons of the Desert, comic Orson Bean.
Stan and Ollie were masters of something which was widespread in silent comedy and into the early talkies, which was the insults paid and returned. If a villain in a Laurel and Hardy piece did something to one of them, they would pay the villain back, and the villain would stand there helplessly while they paid him back. Then they would pay the villain back, or then the villain would pay them back, and they would stand by helplessly, and then they would return. There was no possibility of working anything out. Stan and Ollie were in one world, and everybody else was in another world, and there was no hope of anything except a cold war between Stan and Ollie and the rest of the world. And one of the funniest versions of this was a sea captain, I don't remember the name of the picture, who did some terrible thing to Oliver Hardy, like he broke an egg over his head, or broke it into his hat and then put it on him, and the egg slowly dripped down. And Stanley reached over to a lamp, this was in a restaurant, and pulled a light bulb out of the lamp, unscrewed it, and it went off, opened the man's mouth, stuck the light bulb in, and the man just watched on in horror, but unable to help himself, of course, closed the man's mouth over the bulb, then putting one hand under the man's chin and the other on top of his head, crunched it, and the man just stood there for a long time, and then opened his mouth ever so slightly, and the tiniest little bit of black smoke came out. And then, of course, the man exploded and chased them out of the building. It was a hilarious moment, which I shall cherish.
Their biographer, the author of Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, John McCabe.
I'll always treasure the lucky accident that allowed me to meet Stan and Babe. One night when they were appearing in an English theater, I went backstage, just as a fellow American who had always loved their films and who was just a little bit homesick. I enjoyed talking with them. Thank heavens they enjoyed talking with me, because as the months of their tour of the British Isles rolled by, we became close friends. And I not only got to know them, but to love them. No, I don't suppose their humor is for the ultra-sophisticated or for the cocktail set. Their humor is like themselves, kind, simple in the best sense of that word, clean, above all, human. They are funny because people are funny. I'm very thankful that they are film comedians. It means that we will always have them, and that the Dance of the Cuckoo will be heard forever.
For the final word concerning Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, we return to the vaudeville stage and Oliver Hardy in Copenhagen.
Ladies and gentlemen, words can't express our appreciation for the way you've received our bit of nonsense. We hope to see you and meet you all in person soon. So for now, we'll say good night and God bless. Good night.
You have been listening to a special University of Detroit radio documentary, Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy. The program was produced with the special permission of Mr. Stanley Laurel, who provided the recordings of European performances from his own private collection. Appearing on the program, in addition to Mr. Laurel and his late partner, Mr. Oliver Hardy, were in order of their speaking, John McCabe, Jules Munchin, Gene Sheldon, Hans Conried, Orson Bean, Jack Benny, Marcel Marceau, Arthur Treacher, Soupy Sales, and interviewer Bill Rabe. The title of this broadcast, Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, is the same as the title of the biography written by John C. McCabe, chairman and professor of the Dramatic Art Faculty of New York University, and published by Doubleday and Company, Incorporated. It is used with their special permission. Listeners wishing free copies of this radio script or further information concerning the Laurel and Hardy Study Club, The Sons of the Desert, may write University of Detroit Radio, Detroit 21. That's University of Detroit Radio, Detroit 21. This program was produced and directed by W.T. Rabe. Technical supervisor was Phil Fikert, assisted by Donald Beebe. Your narrator was Paul Winter, and this is Henry Schneiderwind.